The shredder, you know, the sound a paper shredder makes. That mechanical grinding noise. Like metal chewing through bone. That was the soundtrack of my execution. The boardroom of the Pentagon's prime contractor was silent except for that sound. Expensive climate control hummed softly. Crystal water glasses caught the overhead light. The polished redwood table stretched like a runway between power and exile. And at the far end of it, I sat with my palms flat against the cold surface. My name is Richard Thompson. I built that company, and I was about to watch it erase me. The headache that had followed me since dawn tightened as Lawrence lifted a single sheet of paper. My original employment agreement. The one signed when we were nothing but a desperate startup with a soldering iron and a leaking refrigerator. There was still a faded coffee stain in the corner. He held it up like a trophy. We must evolve, he told the board, his voice smooth, rehearsed, surgically confident. Legacy agreements are anchors. The defense sector demands agility, innovation, forward-looking architecture. He didn't look at the paper when he said it. He looked at me. No apology, only triumph. Behind him stood an industrial shredder. Oversized. Excessive. Theatrical. He pressed the power button. The machine roared to life. And then my signature disappeared. Strip by strip. The same signature I wrote when my fingers were still stained with circuit board oil, when my eyes burned from sleepless nights designing radar systems meant to keep pilots alive. Round the table, the directors avoided my gaze. Men and women whose wealth was built on my signal processing patents suddenly found their tablets fascinating. Cowards. Effective immediately. Your security clearance is revoked, Lawrence said, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. Security will escort you out. He wanted spectacle. He wanted dominance. He wanted to prove he could erase the old guard without hesitation. I stood slowly, smoothed my cardigan, met his eyes. You shouldn't have done that, I said quietly. He smirked. He thought I was talking about pride. He had no idea I was talking about consequences. The elevator ride down felt longer than any deployment briefing I had ever endured. Kevin Murphy, the security officer assigned to escort me, kept muttering apologies. We were both former Marines. We had traded stories during late shifts in the lab, while the younger engineers tried to decipher algorithms they barely understood. Now he wouldn't meet my eyes. By the time I reached the sidewalk, I was already thinking tactically. Lawrence believed destruction of paper meant destruction of leverage. He forgot something critical. When the company was still fragile, when investors hesitated and contracts were uncertain, we signed a Founders Protection Protocol. It was drafted by a litigation strategist who treated contract law like naval warfare. Buried deep in the intellectual property transfer clause was a contingency. If my employment ended without defined gross cause criminal negligence or security compromise, the patents I had assigned to the company would automatically revert to a trust under my control. Not symbolically. Legally. Operationally. Years later, when the Pentagon required digital documentation of all contractor intellectual property, I reinforced that clause. I integrated a silent dependency into the license validation server that authenticated our defense contracts. A blockchain escrow. Passive. Invisible. Patient. The moment my termination entered the contractor database, a countdown began. If no certified justification code was uploaded within the grace period, the digital lease token governing our radar systems would expire. And when that token expired, every active contract dependent on those patents would fail authentication. I sat in my car gripping the steering wheel. Under the disappointment, something colder awakened. Precision. I called Michael Davidson. We hadn't spoken in years, but his voice hadn't changed. He didn't gasp. He didn't panic. He whistled softly. That's remarkably reckless, he said. Bring everything you have. We met at a diner far enough from the defense corridor to avoid badge-wearing witnesses. When I explained what had happened, he smiled the way a submarine commander might after detecting a hostile vessel that didn't know it was being tracked. Does he know about the digital registration? Michael asked. No. Then he's already sinking. The grace window closed quietly. There was no explosion. Just silence. Then chaos. Pentagon contract portals began showing license validation errors. Radar verification systems reported authentication failures. Response times across Department of Defense connections flatlined. My phone began to light up. I let it ring. Eventually, Lawrence called directly. His voice had changed. Gone was the polished executive tone. Now he sounded like a reactor operator watching warning lights multiply. "We're experiencing technical difficulties," he said. "All defense systems are showing license errors." "I know," I replied. "I wrote the validation protocols." Silence. Then anger. "This is sabotage. Federal crime territory. It's contract law," I said calmly. "You should have read the clause before shredding the paper." He insisted the company owned everything developed on company time. "Not according to the Founders Protection Protocol registered with the Pentagon database," I answered. "You terminated the legal owner of the core patents." The system responded accordingly. "Fix it," he demanded. "Reactivate it now." "I can't," I said. "It's automated escrow governed by federal compliance. Only the intellectual property owner can issue new license keys." Another silence. Longer. More dangerous. Then he made a mistake. He threatened litigation. Federal prosecutors. Investigations that would bury me for decades. I leaned back in my kitchen chair. "Your clients need operational radar systems today," I said quietly. "How long do you think they'll wait while you sue the person who designed their threat detection algorithms?" I ended the call, and for the first time since the shredder started, I smiled. But that wasn't the end. Because while monitoring public diagnostics and supplier communications, I discovered something worse than arrogance. Cost-cutting orders. Military-grade sensor arrays quietly replaced with commercial components. I called our longtime supplier overseas. They had warned Lawrence about corrosion risks, electromagnetic interference, failure rates in hostile maritime environments. He had overridden them. Profit margin over performance. If those sensors failed on an active destroyer, sailors could die. And my name was still on the patents. Then security logs surfaced. Unusual visitors. Late-night meetings. A name that froze my blood. Stephen Walsh. A foreign electronics executive long suspected of attempting to reverse engineer American radar systems. Server room data transfers aligned perfectly with his visits. Massive encrypted downloads. This was no longer corporate misconduct. This was espionage. An emergency board session was called. A Pentagon representative attended in full uniform. The energy in the same boardroom had shifted. Fear replaced arrogance. When Michael mentioned Walsh's name, the room went cold. I presented the server logs, visitor records, supplier warnings, the timeline. Lawrence tried to frame it as international business development. The Pentagon representative corrected him. Contact with flagged foreign defense entities without disclosure was not business development. It was investigation territory. When data transfer volumes were displayed on the screen, the silence became absolute. Lawrence's confidence evaporated. The board chair, a retired admiral, stood slowly. "Effective immediately," he said. "You are terminated for gross misconduct and breach of security protocol." Security entered. This time, Lawrence was the one escorted out. No shredder. No applause. Just the sound of consequences catching up. When the door closed, the chairman turned to me. "What do you want?" "I don't want my job back," I said. "I want a strategic partnership." I slid a licensing agreement across the table. Exclusive rights to my radar technologies under strict Pentagon oversight. Mandatory component compliance. Full transparency on international contact. They signed. I entered the reactivation code. Across defense networks, authentication warnings vanished. Screens shifted from red to green. Operational status restored. Months later, I sat on the terrace of a lake house watching the sun sink behind pine trees instead of fluorescent lights. The first royalty payment exceeded what I earned in my early years combined. Michael brought expensive whiskey and raised a glass. To the engineer they tried to erase. Lawrence believed I was just another replaceable component in a corporate machine. He never understood. I wasn't a component. I was the current running through the entire system. And the most intelligent revenge is not destruction. It's revelation. Letting your enemy realize too late that they never understood what they were trying to eliminate.